right, guys, welcome back to part two of our chat with Adam Young. What we're going to do is we're going to break out our fireside portion of this chat. And I think I want to start off with what you talked about. You were talking about the concepts, understanding the concepts. So I think a good place to start would be impact, right? Impact variables.
Mhm.
But then I think really good part of this conversation could be like busting myths for the average golfer. Okay. Because there are a lot of bad
Okay.
ideas out there. We ended part one on some of the content that's out there now. So we'll do some myth busting in part two. But in terms of what you do, particularly with any student, I'm assuming, and you're breaking down impact variables and trying to get them to understand the concepts, walk us through what it looks like. What's the typical day on the lesson key with Adam Young look like? What perspective are you viewing improvement from?
Yeah, so I'll watch a player hit a certain number of shots, or we'll gather data on the course in an ideal scenario. And what I'd be looking at on the course would be, where are they losing their shots?
Mhm.
So they could either be, there's going to be technical reasons for this, or they could be mental reasons. So the technical reasons, I always start with the base fundamentals of impact. So in most cases, when a player loses a shot, it's going to be a ground contact error. So either fat, hitting the ground in the wrong place too early, or thin. That's the same umbrella of ground contact errors. A face contact error, so they could hit it too far off the toe or the heel. So both of those errors might result in a short contact, a short result, or then directionally. Usually it's going to be a face direction error. You could say that, someone might have a path error, but usually path doesn't change that much on the golf course. Path is a kind of a consistent thing for most people. The thing that changes on their left versus their right shots is more of a face direction error. So those are what I call the big three. I even have my own podcast, the Sweet Spot Golf podcast, and we constantly reiterate the big three: ground contact, face direction.
Okay.
Most shots, whether you miss a green left or right, long or short, are going to fall into one of those three categories. Then from there, I mean, you could flash a shot and still miss it long or short, and that would then go into mental category errors. I'm not going to go through all of them here. I do have a list of them on my website, but things like club selection, if you flushed it and you just like pick the wrong club, or misjudge of wind, for example, you hit it and the wind was stronger than you assumed it was. So yeah, that's how I'm looking at it on the golf course. I'm trying then to build a tally of, okay, well, you lost a shot here, you lost a shot here. And then at the end of that round of golf, I can look at it and say, well, we need to go off and work on ground contact. That's the thing that's costing you the most shots. I mean, we could obviously work on everything in golf, but if we can prioritize the thing that's costing us the most shots, then that's going to lead to lower handicaps quicker. So it's a very simple analysis. And you can do that on the range as well. You can hit 10 shots. Sorry, my little puppy's going nuts right now. You can hit 10 shots and again, note down what's costing you the most. On the range, you're going to be stuck to the technical variables, though. You're not going to note down a misjudge of club really on the range. So it doesn't give you a fuller picture of what you need more of. But I'm actually trying to develop an app right now. It's in very early beta stage, where it's a simple tap. You're on the course and you say, I lost a shot here, ground contact or club selection. And then it tallies it all and then gives you some drills to work on. So hopefully that will be out at some point in this year. But at least people listening to this can start to understand how they should analyze their game. It's not a case of, oh, my wrist is not flexed like Dustin Johnson, or my right elbow is not in the position I want it to be in. It's a case of, right, this is what's costing me on the golf course. I do apologize if there's a lot of noise.
You're
Carrie,
fine.
I'm in the
Now, to
middle of a
expand on
podcast
what you
here.
just said, that maybe kind of flew under the radar there. The first thing was a number of shots, right? So the first thing
Yeah.
you're looking to do is establish the player's pattern,
Yeah.
right? Okay. For the average listener, the average golfer that's out there listening, he's not trying to change with every ball, every miss, right? We're looking for a predominant pattern before we put an action plan in place. Okay. And then the other thing that you mentioned was the big miss, right? We want the low hanging fruit because we don't want to fix something that isn't broken. We want to fix what's costing you the strokes. And the best piece of advice I could give someone is to eliminate the penalty strokes, right? So your OB shots, your hazards and stuff like that, and eliminate 3 putts. If the average player could do those 2 things alone, they would shave 10 strokes off of their game. Again, the average guy is shooting 95 to 100. So now you're shooting 85, right? You're breaking 90 for the first time. Learn to putt and learn to keep the ball out of the hazard or out of bounds. It's pretty simple. So impact variables, break that down for me. I know technology, we've been in it about the same amount of time. I think I started teaching in college. My first, and as a matter of fact, you'll appreciate this, my first academy, right, while I was in college, I taught out of Assateague Greens. It's a little executive course, little par 3 course. It was right outside where I had my second assistant job. And it was smash factor golf, right? It was all about impact variables, right? Finding the center of the face. Because it's kind of like, and I brought this up at Open Forum, modern instruction, if I were to teach a carpenter, right, through the lens of modern instruction, all we're doing is teaching them how to swing a hammer all day long, right? But when it comes to being a carpenter, you've got to be able to build in all kinds of different directions. And that's what it truly takes to make an effective golfer, is the ability to adapt to the job, which is constant on the golf course, right? And I'm sure you've heard it, and I've talked about this with other instructors that have been on here. Everybody wants consistency, right? Everybody wants consistency. And so what do? They go to a flat lie at the range, pick one target, and hit ball after ball after ball, trying to be consistent. And then they wonder why they can't take their practice game to the course. Right? It's because there isn't any of that variability, right? There's no adversity in their practice session. So they're not actually putting themselves through those types of scenarios that they're going to need on the course to be successful. So what are the things that you, like, let's say homework, you got a student that's working on something in particular, there's got to be some type of approach that you're always looking to have them incorporate into their practice sessions when they're not in front of you. What are some of the things that you like to promote?
Well, yeah, on the topic of consistency, before I go down that road, the topic of consistency, lots of people think, it can be. Everybody says, if you say to someone, how do you become more consistent? People say, well, I got to repeat. So they go out onto the range and they just bash ball after ball after ball, trying to repeat the same motion. The idea is, if you repeat something over and over, you become more repeatable. It has an element of truth to it. But there's a big part of consistency that's not talked about. There's the ability to adapt, not only to the environment. You get put on when that ball is above your feet like this, you've got to do something to make that ball go more right. Or if you have to go under a tree, you have to adapt to the stuff that's in front of you. I know a lot of people say, well, yeah, that's only a few shots in golf. But the other thing is, you've got to adapt to yourself every single day. Every day you wake up and you go onto the range, you're going to be a different golfer. That ball's going to be going more left than normal, or you're going to be hitting a little bit more out of the toe, or maybe you're hitting a little bit more fat one day. And you can have persistent errors that pop up all the time, but you can have completely different mix each day as well. But it doesn't matter. If you've got the ability to adapt, or I call it calibrate, then it doesn't matter. It greatly reduces your need to practice. So, I track my handicap now. I'm a pro, so I don't effectively have one. But occasionally, once every 2 months, I'll go out and I'll play. And my handicap is about a +4. And I practice maybe once a month now. Whereas I used to have to practice 40 hours a week just to maintain a 2 handicap. So what's the difference? How have I lowered my practice amount and increased my level? Well, the difference is I've learned the ability to adapt. So for me now, it's a case of, I go on the range, I see what I've got on the day with my impact variables, and I can quickly calibrate them, change them. So if I'm hitting shots and it's a little fat today, I know what to do to move that ground contact forwards. Everything's a little toey today, I know what to do to move it towards the heel. Everything's a little left today. Not only do I know how to make that ball go more to the right, but I can do it in precise amounts as well. Right. And that skill has been developed from the drills that I use. So in terms of practice exercises or homework that I give people, one of them, I call it experimental practice. Okay. So that's where you're taking an impact variable, such as club face strike, so toe or heel, and then you're intentionally exploring the scale of that. Sure. So I'll say to someone, right, go off, and I want you for a beginner, for example, I might say, do a bunch of chipping swings, and I want you to hit 10 shots off the toe, 10 shots off the heel, and take whichever one you had the lowest score in. So if you say, right, I got 10 out of 10 on the toe, but only 3 out of 10 on the heel. So you take the weakest area and you practice that more until you build that up. So it's neutralizing your tendencies that way, because that player effectively probably suffers with toe shots.
Okay.
Similarly, asking players to hit intentionally right and left, and I actually scale it for them. Lots of my players have launch monitors now, so I'll say to them, hit 10, 20, and 30 yards right, 10, 20, and 30 yards left, do 5 balls of each, so it's a 30-ball game. And now their brain starts to learn, this is what 30 yards left feels like. This is what 20 yards right feels like. And so, yeah, it just, all these games exploring that scale, it's not done in typical practice. I mean, kids do it as kids. We used to play. It's like, let's see who can hook this sand wedge around a tree. Let's see if we can get 150 yards out of a pitching wedge by hooding the face down. Let's see if we can flop a 3-iron in the air so it stops on a dime. We used to play as kids. Adults don't do that. Yet most learning is done through play. That's a natural.
That is a brilliant point. That is a brilliant point. We're so rigid in our approach a lot of times as instructors, just maybe due to time constraints or whatever, but you're truly right. They have wiped out the element of play. And again, I had Nicole Weller on here. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She's the one who teaches the little teeny tiny golfers, 2-3 years old. I mean, she's awesome. But one of the things I was trying to get with her about was the exploration and how it's not just important at the childhood or the adolescent stages. I mean, even into adulthood. And again, I call it a window, but I like scaling, you know what I mean? To establish and understand what those different patterns are and a feel for them, you have to play with it. You have to explore. If you don't, you're not going to understand what's causing a certain issue at a certain given time. Like you said, to be able to calibrate it and adjust, know immediately. That only comes from trying to play all those different shots and really mess around with it. So let's get into some of the fallacies that some average golfers might have. Let's save them some strokes from their Instagram reels that are flying out there. What's one of the biggest modern no-nos, stay away from that, you think, that you've seen here recently?
I suppose the biggest fallacy for golfers is always their expectation levels of what they should achieve. Even when I was a kid, I used to think that you should go out and hit 100% fairways. I have no idea why. I used to watch TV and see Tiger Woods in the trees all the time, but for some reason I had it in my head that missing a fairway was wrong. I know we have to see it as percentages. Pros average 60% fairways.
Yeah,
Tiger averaged 50 in his career. So there's not even a direct correlation between how many fairways you hit and how good you are. You just have to.
I actually think that 60% number, or excuse me, I'm thinking greens. 60% greens, I think, is like 100 yards. You know what I mean? And I think that the average proximity to the hole at 100 yards on the PGA Tour is something like 21 feet. So 7 yards, everybody thinks they're throwing darts. Well, yeah, that's because that's what they're showing you on TV. But in reality, a lot of those guys are banging 20 footers, with a 58 in their hand or a 56 in their hands. That was one of the things I did with the range when I was down in Florida, is I got a bunch of PVC pipes and I actually went out there and I stuck proximity poles around each yardage at the PGA Tour average. So it was 21 feet at 100, and I think it's like 28 feet or something like that at 125. And I mean, it's not nearly as tight as you would think. But all of a sudden now my average players are saying, oh, okay, well, I'm a little bit off left or right, but that's what the tour guys are doing. So managing expectations is another big part of mental preparedness and performance, in my mind, is giving yourself a little bit of a break. We like to beat ourselves up on the golf course, and it's one of the worst things you can do, especially if you're looking to perform.
Yeah, I'll often be on the course with a player and they'll hit it, maybe they'll hit it, they'll just miss the green, it'll bounce in the bunker and they slam their club. They're like, oh, such a bad shot. And I'll say, well, where were you aiming? And they show me that they were aiming at the pin, which is tucked in tight to the corner. And I say, well, you just didn't hit a bad shot. In fact, I was only 12 yards offline, which at this level is pretty much tour proximity, tour average. and you're in the bunker. So it wasn't a bad shot. It was a bad target. You hit a tall
Mhm.
level shot with a bad target. So, I mean, as a really general rule, you can say, right, aim for the middle of the green. I know there's more nuances to that, but I think that works for the majority of people, aiming to the middle of the green, playing a club that if you hit it well will go at least 10 yards past the pin. Obviously, it depends. If the pin's on the back and there's trouble on the back, you might not want to do that. But playing a little bit more club towards the middle of the green is going to allow most people to hit more greens in regulation. Definitely.
Sure, sure. Well, I think the choice also to bring scaling back up, when I talk to players and coach them, what is the process to actually pick in the target? It's okay, my optimal shot is here, my typical miss is here, and the one that I don't want to see is here. Here's that pattern. Now my target is based with that pattern, right? So we're adjusting a little bit. We're kind of playing a miss, but we're also kind of not, because we've got the optimal shot in our mind and we've got the X shot in our mind as well. So, just those little subtleties, just thinking through that and making a good, because you're right, shitty choices lead to shitty shots, or I
Yeah.
should say shitty results. Sometimes,
Yeah.
a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I like to. I actually have a system. I don't want to get into too much complexity, but yeah, there's a difference between the flag and the target, and there's also a difference between your target and your aim. So, an example: the flag might be on the left. I might have my target as the center of the green, but I might even aim farther right of that because I have a tendency to miss more left. So I
Right.
might be aiming at the right side of the green when the flag is on the left. And you know what? Sometimes I'll pull it, hook it a little bit, hit a bit of my fault, and it lands right next to the flag. And other people go, "Oh, well done, you hit a good shot." And I said, "No, I played sensible and allowed my mistake to work out for me." Scott Fawcett is the guy who has done a lot of work on that
Yep.
and really popularized it. But yeah, he's a great one to look into for that stuff. But yeah, just understanding that target selection is not always the flag, because we have a much wider dispersion than most people believe.
Yeah, and I think he gets discredited a lot, man. He took a little bit of a beating at Forum. He was at Open Forum, and I actually really enjoyed hearing what he had to say, because I align with his opinion on a lot of this stuff, and I think that statistics, right? And again, establishing the pattern is something that a lot of coaches miss out on, right? They're so worried about looking at the aesthetics or what's going on high speed film. And tech's a whole nother thing, because I'm sure I think when I started, it was like 120 frames per second was high speed when
All
we
right.
started. And a couple years later, we got flight scope. Now we got 3D. And I was hoping that the culture of the golf instruction world was going to change, and it is still geared more towards performance, but it's a different approach than I would like to see. I like the more holistic hippie approach, which is again the exploration, really understanding how to develop your individual craft, because I think the value of owning it, once you've developed it that way, it can't be shaken. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Whereas if you're constantly attacking the golf swing from a logical, scientific test, adjust, test, adjust, test, adjust, the player never builds the confidence that they do when they own it on their own. I mean, am I off base? Is that way off base? I mean,
No, I agree with that. And I use tech. I have launch
oh,
monitors and things like
certainly.
that.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but the more I coach, the more I go towards simple things. I used to shove up the face number when on the launch monitor when people were practicing. But even that now, I just use the ball flight. Even when on the
Sure.
launch monitor, I say, look, that ball went too far left. You need to open the face a little bit more to turn it into a draw instead of a hook. And they might say, well, what was the face number exactly? And I'm like, you don't need to know that. Whether it was
Right.
3 or 4 degrees, you don't need to know that. All you need to know is your next one needs to be a little bit more open, so you need to adjust it in the right amount. And then we work on games that allow them to adjust it in the right amount so that they own it and they build the feel. So, if you ask me what it feels like to hit 20 yards right and versus 20 yards left, I might produce a different feel to what you might say 20 yards left feels like. You might feel it coming more from your wrists. I might feel it coming more from a different part of my body, and that's what owning it is. No one's right or wrong. It's just as long as you can produce what you're trying to produce
Sure.
repeatedly and controllably, then that's all that matters.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a weird game, man. You know what I mean? Back in the day, there used to be so many different individual swings. And as a matter of fact, the other day you posted some footwork. Was that Sevi?
Mm. It's Greg Norman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
All
Greg
right.
Norman. So really good
Okay. I was going
drive
to
of the
use that to
ball.
get into
Yeah.
Sevi. And, you were talking about flopping the 3 irons and stuff on the beach, like that was his thing. But
Mm.
what happened to Sevi once he got a swing change? Once he started searching for the change, that
Yeah.
was it.
Yeah.
That was it. I mean,
This
you can go from owning your stuff to a detrimental change like that. It will keep you from ever performing at your peak levels ever again if you let it. You know what I mean? I think a lot of that comes down to choice and approach.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has been, some of it has been poor information. So, changing someone's swing for the sake of beautifying it, for example, making it more symmetrical. I think more instructors, at least the instructors who are really deep in the mechanics now, they understand at least why an ugly swing would work. Like a better instructor these days could look at a Jim Furyk and say, well, okay, it's not symmetrical, it's not pretty, but it works because he has all the tenets of a good golfer in there. He has a shallowing position, things like that. His hand path arcs in nicely, so he has good traits in there. There's a lot of flair around that, obviously, but there are still instructors, and this happened back in the 80s, who would have just torn Jim Furyk apart and say, well, you can't swing like that because it doesn't look pretty. And there's no logic. Well, the logic behind it is a symmetrical swing is going to perform better. But that's as far as the logic extends. And I think that's where most golfers are these days. I think the instruction is probably 20 years behind. So where instructors are now, the amateurs are 20 years back. So they're still thinking in terms of, I've got to make my swing pretty and then it'll perform better. And it's not that way. So I think it's progressed to the point where now at least we understand, okay, there are functional movements in the swing and there are lots of different ways that can work. So, the term is thrown around matchups now. Basically, it's different functional combinations. So Dustin Johnson can be just as functional as Webb Simpson, even though they look very different. And Tiger Woods can be just as functional as Jack Nicklaus, even though they look very different.
Sure.
So there's the bad knowledge versus we're getting better at good knowledge. But then there's also the understanding that what actually controls whether a result is good or bad is the minutiae at impact. Mm-hmm. And this is where you could throw up McIlroy, for example, when he hits one, pipes it straight down the middle. And then you could throw up a swing of him maybe later in the round where he snap hooks it 40 yards left. It happens, people. It happens more than you think. And if you looked at those swings, there's no difference. There's barely any difference. And there's even guys researching this now. This is going to be, I'm not going to name the guys who are doing it because I don't want to spoil their work, but they've done a lot of biomechanical research, so hooking them up to everything. And what they did is they were showing their good shots, and then they waited for a bad shot, and they look in the data and they say, well, what's the difference here? What happened? You know what? They didn't find any difference. Or the difference between their good and their bad shots, there was as much variability between those as the difference between two good shots.
Right.
So it's just like, it's not, you can't find the answer in technique always for what the good and the bad shot is, because the difference could be 2 or 3 degrees of face closure, like I said, which can be as little as this. Like, you can't even see my wrist movement here. If you've ever been on Hack Motion that measures the wrist sensor, this little thing that I'm doing would just like send the scale all over the place. It's such a small change, and these are happening at 100-mile-an-hour speeds.
Right.
And so
which brings up another
hard.
really good point. As swings get faster, the minutia matters that much more, because now all of a sudden we're creating higher spin rates, which create more drag as the ball's flying through. So it's deviating that much further from the initial launch line. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, I mean, I will say that has certainly been progress that I've seen over the last couple of years of speed training. Is certainly, I mean, everybody's faster, it seems like, whether they're more efficient.
Apart from me,
with that speed, is a whole nother thing. So, and actually that brings up another one. You were talking about Furyk, and then you brought up Nicklaus, and I was thinking of Nicklaus with the high hands. this is another good myth, is right, is like we've got to create that width and that really long backswing to store the power, right, to that potential energy. Well, look at John Rahm. John Rahm is an absolute stud, beats it all over the place, and he's pretty much parallel to parallel, you know? So to your point, we're all individual, creatures. We all have a different physiology. We all have a different system, essentially, that can be put together, right? So what's another good myth that you could think of? I know
Well, even
there's
on swing length, I mean, the swing length, it makes sense from a physics point of view that the longer you swing or the farther you swing your hand path, the more potential you have for distance.
Sure.
But when you add that into humans, it doesn't always make sense because, if you get an old person to swing back farther, you now put their body in a position where they feel like, I don't have the balance or the strength or the flexibility from here. And the body can even shut down and produce less speed. So there's certain things that make sense from a physics point of view that when you implement into humans just doesn't work. You asked for another myth?
Yeah,
I
sure.
mean,
We could sit here and bust myths all night,
yeah.
Adam. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, there's so many myths. So yeah, the fact that you have to swing the parallel, lots of amateurs still believe that. It's just not true. You get guys who are short, you get guys who are long. The fact that you have to take the club back, on the takeaway, everybody's like, right, you have to take the club back so it's perfectly in line with your feet.
Sure.
Well, you've got Matt Wolf, who's got the club way out there. You had Ray Floyd, Nancy Lopez, who sucked the club way inside, John Daly as well. The only reason why the majority of tour pros look that textbook way is because they were all taught that textbook way. And so, there's a lot of correlation causation myths there. What else? The flatness of the plane. You get some guys who are steeper, some guys who are flatter in the backswing. They all come down very similar, but even then there's a spectrum. Feet movement. So, I was taught keep my feet on the ground, which absolutely ruined my athleticism. And, I can't remember the instructor's name, but he said, I think he said he had Ernie Els once, and he was literally pinning his foot to the ground, and Ernie Els was just flaring it everywhere. And he said, you know what, I give up and let him do it. And we see a lot of great players whose feet move around, jump up, the foot slides back or whatever. So foot movement can be kind of individual as well. Again, there are some bad things that you don't see on tour, but there are lots of good things or things that are perfectly acceptable that used to get taught out of players.
Right.
Luckily, with modern technology and modern understanding, we don't teach those things out of players anymore.
Right. Here's one. I've heard this floating around a lot lately. Strokes gained off the tee is more important than strokes gained putting. Okay. Now I will say that with a caveat. When it comes to touring players, yes, you better be driving and gaining strokes from the tee if you're on tour. But for the average amateur out there, if you're looking to pound it an extra 4 or 5 yards, it's not going to help you more than being able to make every 4-footer, 3-4-footer you look at.
I think there's also, I call it return on time invested. So, how much you might have more potential to gain strokes, say, through driving, but it might be much easier and quicker to save more strokes through putting, for example. I would often say for me to gain 20 yards driving, I'm maxed out in terms of launch and spin. I've got those down to a T. So the only way I'm going to gain 20 yards is by hitting the gym, doing loads of speed training. It's going to take me 3 months to gain 20 yards. Whereas I might have the same strokes gained just by hitting the practice green before a round of golf and getting a feel for the speed of the green that day. So it's much quicker return on time invested. But then, that's not to discount the bigger picture. If I want to say, right, I want to gain a consistent 1.4 strokes around, then I'm going to have to add that 20 yards. But if I'm preparing for a tournament, I focus more on short game stuff where I'm thinking big picture, overall season wide stats. Then I go more with the long game stuff.
I gotcha. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I mean, my perspective, I grew up playing baseball, so I've never had a problem with distance. I've always been able to pretty much overpower a golf course. And in college, I thought I'd be able to do it a long time, but in college, it really exposed me because now you're playing, championship tracks, you're playing a lot tighter lies. So if you don't have that short game, you are not going to score. It's just, so that gave me the passion to learn short game and then to teach short game and then to kind of track my players and see what worked and see what approaches worked for them. And the biggest bites that I think most players can take out of the apple, 150 in. If you can play this game from 150 yards in and then learn how to put it into play off the tee, you can be a very successful golfer. And I think that if we were just to go to any average driving range, what do we see players doing? They're pulling driver, they're driver, right? You might hit 14 drivers in a round. Might. And here they are, driver. So, if they take away anything from this, it's more of a complete practice plan, I hope. And I hope that they implement in some of the ideas that you're obviously talking here. Again, that micro variability. I love the drills of, working all over the club face, the heel strikes to the toe strikes and learning how to do all that stuff. Because I think scaling, it does help them develop that pattern that they need to have to understand how to develop that skill and how to utilize those skills once they get on the course. So you got one more myth for us to bust, or you want to keep it going? We've got another session for backup if you want to get into any more ideas.
I suppose setting up out of the center of the face or setting up square could be one. I mean, we see that
both of those are really
tall pros don't always set up with their body lines square. Sometimes their shoulders tend to be more open with irons. Club face tends to be slightly shut on average as well, although you see a spectrum. I actually set up with the face open at address. Yeah. I just go on the rule of take your tendency, your fault, and try the opposites. I tend to hook the ball to the left, so if I set up with the face more open, that alleviates my pattern. And also for a lot of players, they think that they have to set up with the ball right in the center of the face. And there's no rule in golf that says that. You can set up out of the toe or the heel if you want to. In fact, I've done blogs showing several very successful professional golfers who set up out of the heel or the toe. And so, if it helps you, say, for example, you're a shanker and you find it really helps you to hit set up out of the toe, then go for it. There's no shame or judgment in that. No one's going to take your trophy off you at the end of the round of golf because they say, oh, you set up out the toe. You're not allowed to do that. It's just, people are so obsessed with perfection that they just don't allow themselves to get the job done. And I used to be there once. I am a very perfectionist in nature, but
this game will humble you.
Yeah, exactly. It came a point where I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to make it work. Yeah. And I actually started to embrace the fact that I do things differently. And I've done some blog posts where I prove that impact is everything by making wild swings. I'll grip it like that and send 10 down there, right down the target. I'll grip it cack-handed. I'll do a loop over my head and just repeat over and over this tight draw onto the target. I'll do these swings where I swing back and come out of posture and dive bomb and still hit the ball towards the target.
Pitch shots backwards. So I'd stand up with my back to the target and swing out in front of me and kind of hack behind. Yeah, I mean, you can, if you understand how to use the tool. Again, there's that carpenter analogy. If you understand how to use the tool, you can put yourself into all kinds of situations and still be successful.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so before we close this out, AdamYoungGolf.com. Everybody's going to go and pick up the practice manual. This is a goal of mine, by the way. One day I'm going to write a book, okay? And hopefully it'll be half as good as this one is. So seriously, go pick this up. Where can they pick this up? Amazon or your website?
Just Amazon. Yeah, Amazon. That's the way it's sold. Yeah.
I'll pick your brain on your process to getting this done one day in the future. All right. So before we leave it out, what is one thing, one idea, one word that the average golfer at home who's listening to this can incorporate into their practice that will make all the difference to their playing abilities? Just one idea.
Skill development.
I love it. I threw you a softball there and you crushed it. All right. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, man. It was good chatting with you. Glad you back across the pond, nice and safe. And if I ever get out there to the desert, I'll make sure to come say hello, and we'll talk some philosophy and
Yeah, you have a
monetary
place here.
monetary policy. We'll get you invested into some gold and silver, and then at least you'll have at least a pretty ball mark. You know what I mean? Worst case scenario.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Have a great evening, man. Thanks again for coming on.
You too.